All right. Thank you, Seth Haines, for joining us. Seth is the author of the award-winning book, Coming Clean, and also the new book, The Book of Waking Up, which is excellent. He's appeared in my Sunday school class as a guest speaker, among his many accolades. And Seth, how you doing today?
Good. That's actually one of the accolades I'm proudest of. I say it all the time. Appeared in Ed's Sunday school class.
Yeah. You've been like going
Actually, it was a
around.
lot of fun.
I mean, like you were like dominating on Zoom before the quarantine, and Zoom became like all the rage. Like you've been.
That's right. I like to say that I was Zooming before Zoom was cool.
Yeah. um, yeah. So I wanted to talk about kind of like paths to reconnect and how we do our work, how we engage on social media, how we use our phones and technology, and stay sane. And so, just to kind of start out, why don't you just talk a little bit about what you've been working on or what you're working on right now? I mean, I can't really keep track of everything that you've been publishing lately. You have like a whole new series of things you're doing with your Patreon. So just whatever you want to walk through as far as your work right now and what you've been up to.
Yeah, I think I can probably connect it to a little bit to reconnect too. Connect it to reconnect. Is that
There
a
we
thing?
go.
To your book, Reconnect, to Ed's book, Reconnect, which is amazing, by the way. I think so for me, when I think about my work right now, I think about the work of sobriety. It's what I've always, it's what I've written about for the last really 5 to 6 years off and on.
Right.
The entrance into sobriety was Coming Clean. It was the first book I wrote. Is kind of my memoir on walking into a life of sobriety. And then the Book of Waking Up, my latest book, is really a book about what it means to be sober beyond the sort of do or don't do things. We have this tendency to say that to be sober is to drink or not to drink. It's to, I don't know, shoot up or not shoot up, and certainly there are some things that like we shouldn't do. You shouldn't shoot heroin up. You shouldn't, look at porn. But outside of some of the sort of hard line should and should nots, I find that there's a different, like more holistic way to talk about sobriety. So for me, the question of sobriety is not to drink or not to drink, but instead it is, do I use the created stuff of earth only in ways that enhance my attachment to God, that somehow enhance my ability to love God, to love others around me, to love the world around me. And that's really important to me lately because what I've been noticing is as I'm cooped up in this quarantine, like everyone else, as I'm locked down, I go from about 2 places, like my office to my house, or from my house to my office. I mean, those are like the 2 places that I actually go out. I don't go to restaurants. I don't go to coffee shops anymore. These sorts of things. As I'm cooped up more and more and more, I am finding myself drawn away from sobriety. And by that, I don't mean drawn to alcohol. I mean, I find myself drawn to use things in a disordered way that don't sort of enhance my attachment to God and my attachment to my neighbor. And the primary thing that disrupts my sobriety is this right here,
Right.
as you can see. I mean, it's the cell phone. And again, to kind of go back to what your book is about, but also what I say about sobriety is that this is a tool. This is not an innate negative. It's not an innate bad. But when I use this in ways that disrupt my connection with God and with others, and when I elevate it, when I use it as an escape mechanism, as a coping mechanism, as anything to sort of get my mind off the pain of the world, then in that way it becomes an addiction. And so for me lately, what I've been writing a lot more about, in addition to this idea of sobriety, this more holistic view of sobriety that applies to alcohol and cell phones and food and so forth and so on, shopping, whatever. I've been finding myself writing a lot more about silence. I've been finding myself like drawn to silence. I've been finding myself drawn to silent practices and artistic outputs like photography, I have been finding myself deeply, deeply drawn to silence and solitude and these places where the distraction of the phone is sort of in the background, and it fades away. Whether that's because I'm writing, whether that's because I'm practicing silence, or whether that's because I'm walking around, my neighborhood with a camera or whatever it is. So as far as my work, I think that's kind of where I am right now, is just really exploring silence. And that's what I do. The Patreon group that you talked about, I've moved most of that to Substack. And that's what I'm doing really primarily in my Substack, is let's explore, in addition to my monthly newsletter, let's explore silence together through photographs and through words and through practice.
Right. And I think it's interesting that a lot of times folks are interacting with your book and like you've already moved on to like the next thing, like you're already moving on to like the silence stuff. And so you're kind of going back and forth to talk about, almost this evolution of your ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, it's really interesting that you said that transition happened really before the quarantine, before the lockdown. I mean, it was pretty quick. So what happened after I released the Book of Waking Up was what happens with every book launch. I mean, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, you're sort of like down this rabbit hole of promotion. You're always on social media. You're on all the podcasts. You're doing as much as you can to get the word out there. And what I noticed in that season, and that would have been the really January into February, what I noticed was that my mind was just a spin cycle. I couldn't hold a thought. I couldn't get focused. My next thought was on the next interview or the next thing I had to write or the next conversation about the book or whatever. And what I found was that in that like brief period of time, that the only time I could like get things under control and not feel anxious or like I was trying to spin things up was when I had my camera and I was walking around town taking photographs. Again, that was pre-quarantine, pre-lockdowns. And it was in that moment that I thought, oh, what I'm actually craving is not photography as a fine art. What I'm actually craving is that experience of paying attention in the silence, which is what good photographers do. There was this famous French photographer named Henri Cartier-Bresson, and he would talk about finding that decisive moment. But to find that decisive moment, you have to pay attention. You have to give yourself to the moment fully. And to give yourself to a full moment, to really pay attention, you have to cultivate this sort of interior silence. In fact, excuse me. In fact, he calls excuse me, I inhaled my coffee a little bit. He calls portraits sort of this silent freeze moment, that this thing that you can return to over and over again. That's like this silent capturing of a moment. And that's what I was really wanting. And so over the last couple months, particularly going into the lockdown, that's what I was really focused on, was how can I be true to the work that is the Book of Waking Up, which is a book about sobriety. How can I be true to that and cultivate this sort of inner silence that really should be at the core of true sobriety?
Yeah. One of the things, this is just kind of a side note, but one of the things that our class really loved was that Westminster Confession for the stuff of earth, the pursuit of the whizbang is a chief end of man. And I think that,
yes,
that silence though is kind of the opposite, I would say probably it's a different kind of whizbang, but it's a slower whizbang.
Yeah. So in the Book of Waking Up, for a little bit of context, like I talk about how the stuff of earth is the whizbang. It's what we call, it produces what's called the whizbang, right? So when you have pain in your life and you need distraction and you drink and that drink numbs you up and you get that kind of euphoric feeling, that's the whizbang, right? Or when you have sex and in that moment afterwards, it's the whizbang, it's that great feeling. Or or even when you shop and you purchase something, a high dollar item, or just another book on Amazon, which I am prone to do, there is a brain chemical that is released that gives you the euphoric state. It's the whizbang. It's why we have compulsive shoppers. It happens in gambling. It happens when we eat. Anything that is sort of created in the world that we use produces that euphoric state. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that God wants to send us the message that, hey, this feels good. You should do it again. Now, that's not necessarily to say that gamblers, compulsive gamblers say, oh, this feels good, I should keep compulsively gambling. But that, like in the gambling brain chemistry, that is connected to risk and reward. So sometimes we have to risk to get really high reward. And it's the same chemical release that happens in gambling. And so it's that whizbang. It's God saying, pay attention to these things. These things are the stuff that I've created and they're good for you. What's really been fascinating to me as I've thought through sort of reorienting my life, not around the whizbang, but around the creator, has been examining the things that produce those whizbangs. And you're exactly right. One of the big ones, not necessarily silence, but one of the big whizbang producers in life is meditation. Right. So we know that when we sit in silence and we meditate and we examine ourselves and we are fully present in the moment, that there is this like sort of state of euphoria that sets in. In fact, I was talking to a friend not too long ago, and I've totally ruined my streak this last week, but I had a streak of like 12 days where every day I had a meditation practice that I had not missed. And by about day 6, when I was finishing my meditation, I would come out and it was like this euphoric whiz-bang moment. And after that, I would turn to prayer and I would turn to the scripture studies. And it was there that I found the most clarity in prayer and scripture, because I had sort of cleaned out my mind. You know, I'd gotten rid of all the other things that I was searching for. So we know that like meditation in silence produces whiz-bang. We know that connecting with community face-to-face produces that sort of whiz-bang. We know that attending church and connecting with the divine sort of produces that whiz-bang too. And so there are all these really God-given things that produce those whiz-bangs, those amazing chemicals that have nothing to do with this.
Right. And just for like the thinking of the range of potential viewers or listeners to this interview, when you say meditation, are you talking about a guided app, or are you doing something that's just a attentiveness to nature? Or
I mean, you could do either. I've used an app called Timeless. And somebody recommended it to me, and I can't remember who. I wish I could remember, because I would totally plug them. Because at first I was like, oh, it's kind of expensive and dumb, and I'll just do my own mindful meditation. But it has been so good. And I was like, I can't remember. It was maybe $50 like for the year subscription. And I thought, wow. Oh my gosh, that is like a lot of lattes. But then I thought, you know what? I'm not buying lattes anymore. So, because I can't go to the coffee shops, might as well invest here. It has been the best investment of my year. I mean, the market's down like 13%, so of course it's been the best investment of my year.
Right.
But it's been really good. So I've used various methods for a really long time. This one is really helpful for me for whatever reason.
Yeah. Cool. So thinking about how, you're on social media, you've been on social media for a while, and I think that I've seen you on there at least as long as I've been on there. And how has your use evolved? How are you placing boundaries around yourself these days, or how are you using it differently? It sounds, obviously for book releases, maybe you go through different seasons where you use it in different ways, but I just wanted to get a sense of, now that we're, kind of to think about, Reconnect, and I think there's a lot of connections between Reconnect and your book, but I know that you've written a lot about this, how your use has evolved over the years.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's really in depth too. I would say if you went back to my timeline, through probably 2015 leading up to the election, really, you would see sort of the pinnacle of my frenetic use of social media. So I've been writing for years, but at that point I was really using Twitter and Facebook as a means to sort of share my disgust with the current political milieu. I was deeply involved with that, sharing my both anxiety and my revulsion from the political candidates of the time and what was going on. And I'll probably name names later, but I'll get to that. And I think probably through 2017 and really 2018, I started to notice that what I was doing was nothing. Nobody was listening except for the people who already agreed with me. So I could tweet something about, for instance, the immorality of a man who would be on his third wife and yet be claimed as the moral paragon for our age from a particular Christian movement running for president. And the only people who would agree with me were the people that already agreed with me. And then all the people that disagreed with me would just fight with me, and we would just go back and forth, and nothing was ever accomplished. And it really started to feel like it was not embodying the ethos that was in John 17, which is Jesus's great run about unity. It just felt really disunifying. And on top of that, it felt really like using booze again. Like I got the same exact feeling when I would go on a long 2-hour Twitter rant with somebody as when I would just drink for 2 hours. The only difference was when I came out of it on the backside, I felt a lot less guilty and a lot more like righteous somehow, even though that's sort of ridiculous. And I can't remember exactly when it happened, but I started to kind of taper off and just decided, there are things that I cannot say here that don't matter. And even like some of the areas of justice that I care about that I would previously have tweeted about, I stopped tweeting about. And I started saying, like, if I don't practice this in my local community first, then I really have no right tweeting about it. And if I'm already practicing it in my local community, why do I need to tweet about it? It was this kind of like circular logic. So I really started thinking more about how do I practice it in my local community justice and not virtue signal all the time. And not that we don't need to sometimes use social media to talk about issues of the day, and I'll get to that. So in probably 2018 is when I began to make that shift. Somewhere last year, and again, I don't remember the dates, but I just quit Facebook pretty much. I mean, outside of like using it to do author updates and ask a question here or there for a while, I really felt like I lost my footing on Facebook. I felt like I couldn't go on there anymore without like just watching the war happen and watching, news articles that I knew were not based in fact and that felt like conspiracy theories from both sides, and watching both sides name call and watching, loved ones get into fights with other loved ones and watching myself pick fights with other loved ones. I just decided like I'd had enough. And Facebook was the first thing that I pretty much cut out. I still use it from time to time, but like it's not on my phone. I have to navigate to Facebook to use it. I don't really like the platform that much. So I cut it out, and that was a pretty easy one. Like I don't miss it. I put it on my phone last week for something. I used it for 3 days and I'm like, man, this adds no value to my life. I got off my phone again. Twitter's the harder one, man. So I tried to navigate into that sort of more like, let's just be kind and gentle and unifying on Twitter. And I think for a while I did that with some ease. I'm trying to be a witness there of something that's different, a different way. I set limits on it. I try not to be on it too much throughout the day. I try to only tweet a couple times, 3 times maybe. I pop in and out, get in and out. I don't really scroll the feed. That's one way I've modified my use.
Yep.
I only like really look at people who I'm interacting with, like who I know. So I've curated particular lists. I've set up notifications from people that I, want to see what they're doing. And I won't say who's on that list. So I really curate my interactions there to keep myself clear-headed.
Yep.
And for the most part that works. But then like last week, and I will name names here, Eric Metaxas dropped a ridiculous piece of what he thought was satire, but was just blatant racism. And in that moment, I engaged and I said, no, man, this is wrong. And then said, hey, repent. And then I actually got in the DMs and I started DM pastor friends and writers, Christian writers, and said, you need to go out and call this guy to repent because this racism is wrong. And this is not virtue signaling. This is literally being a voice for the Christian witness in the public sphere, right? So there are times when I still do that, and I still will do that, and I won't ever not do that. But for the most part, I try to stay out of the politics, try to stay out of the conspiracy, try to stay out of the virtue signaling, and really just keep up with the people that I love. Instagram. So let's go to the third platform, Instagram.
Right,
This one is really important to me. It's important to me for a couple reasons. One, it was started as a platform around connection. And I guess they all were in a sense, but it was sort of the last bastion of two things, connection and beauty. You went there because you wanted to see your nieces and nephews, when you scrolled through the feed. Or I wanted to see like Sean Smucker's new puppy, for instance, or I wanted to see a really beautiful shot of, Southeast Asia that I would never otherwise see because I live in Arkansas. I've always used it to keep up with photographers. So for me, it is a place to curate beauty. So here's the trend that I started noticing at the end of last year. I started noticing that people were taking their political statements on Twitter and Facebook and were screenshotting them.
You shot him, yeah.
And we're putting them on Instagram.
Yep.
Like, so my platform for beauty started to get full up with people's politics.
Yep.
And dude, I was pissed. So I muted every one of them. If you have ever taken a screenshot of your tweet, and I've seen it, and you've put it on Instagram, I have muted you. And I have muted really dear friends who don't know that they're muted. I probably won't even ever go unmute them. Because for me, it's the kind of thing that has been really just ugly and no good. And so I continue to use Instagram only as a platform for beauty and for sharing beauty and for recognizing beauty and for liking and commenting on beauty.
I like that. I like the emphasis on a particular usage. I think that maybe sometimes getting on these platforms and it's the pursuit of the whiz-bang, the distraction, the disconnecting from reality, and you don't really know why you're on there other than it feels good and your friends are there, and there are good motivations, but maybe it's not as well thought out as it should be.
Yeah, one of the things, in fact, I had a conversation with my publisher in maybe February or early March. And the recommendation was that I start using Instagram more to promote the Book of Waking Up. And I said no. I said no at first, and then I'll circle back to, I actually ended up saying yes, but I said no at first. And I said, my main feed is to curate beauty and to examine beauty and to share what I think is beautiful. And then I want to do the same thing. I want to love and share. And so like if I see something that's beautiful, a lot of times I'll share it in my stories. Somebody else's art, somebody else's beauty, because I think it's really worth it. But so I try to keep that as a platform for beauty, and I will from time to time drop a video that talks about, the Book of Waking Up, or I'll use IGTV to talk about my work or to talk about the work of other people. And a lot of times I'll leave a snippet up of that on my Instagram main feed for, a week, and then I'll delete it and drop a new video on there about once a week. But again, like the primary use for that is not to sell books. It's really because I think that beauty and truth and goodness in the world needs to be celebrated, and that's a platform where we can still do that without like feeling like we're selling our souls or getting into fights all the time.
Mm. I'll probably betray my nerdiness here, but I think what I really love about Instagram is when people take a picture of a book they're reading, with the parts underlined or whatever. That's kind of my like favorite thing. That's honestly how I discovered Richard Rohr in the first place, because I saw people quoting him, and then people started posting pictures on Instagram of Richard Rohr, and I was like, I should check this guy out. And that's part of my little rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I think to your point, man, that's beauty. That's cultivating beauty. Like when you read something that moves you, whether it's a poem or from a novel or from a theological writer or whatever, and you underline that and you post that on Instagram, dude, I am there all day for that. I love that.
Okay, so that's Seth Haines saying I'm not muted then on his Instagram.
You're not muted. Some of our friends are muted.
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of Reconnect, there is a foreword written by Seth Haines. If anyone wants to screenshot that and put it on Instagram. But it's kind of funny. You actually invited yourself to write this over Facebook, kind of ironically.
Oh, I did. I forgot about that.
Which is great. Which is, I was going to ask you anyway, so that was a fortuitous moment. But one of the things I talk about in the book, I kind of end it with this like mantra of, guard your time, restore yourself in silence, make one-on-one connections is kind of like a way to reconnect. And you've already talked a lot about how you reconnect and things like that. I just wanted to give you a chance to, if there's anything you wanted to expand on or add to kind of how you reconnect, or how you are reconnecting in quarantine, or what that looks like today.
Yeah, it's been really hard. I was actually talking with somebody about this just the other day. It's been really hard in quarantine for a lot of reasons. So we went, my family, for some context, Arkansas never really all the way shut down. Our caseload has remained one of the lowest in the country. Part of that is because we saw the trends happening across the country, and our governor was pretty quick to put the brakes on some things. And so, like him or not, it's worked out pretty well for Arkansas. It is opening back up, and so we're seeing those numbers creep up a little bit in the last really week. But we were in lockdown. My family was in lockdown for 60 days, really without going out. I think I went out maybe once or twice to the grocery store, and I think Amber went out about the same number of times. And what ended up happening in that space for us was that it got real noisy. We have 4 kids, 4 older boys. We had very little time together before 9 o'clock. And it was really loud, and even they were doing school, and it was great, and they were learning, but it was just very difficult. So I started waking up a little bit earlier. I'm an early riser anyway, and I started waking up a little bit early and really practicing my meditation practices early to like really hold on to the silence. And then about halfway through, Amber and I started talking about we needed some connection, and I don't remember who suggested it first, but we started talking about the fact that we had all become sort of unintentional monastics. And then Greg Hillis I don't know if you know Greg Hillis, but he's from Louisville, and he had written this amazing piece for America about sort of the unintentional monastic community that we've all joined, like it or not.
Yeah.
And so in light of sort of this vein of thought and what Greg had written, we started really asking ourselves, what would it look like if we actually created monastic connection? So for us, after I have my time of silence, Amber will she gets up a little bit later. She'll have her time of silence. And then before the boys get up, we'll be very intentional about our morning prayers, in creating a rhythm around connecting together in morning prayers. And so in those prayers, we reflect on who God is through the Psalms and the scriptures. And then we reflect through our own prayers about what our desires are and thoughts are. And then we have a little bit of conversation afterwards before she goes off to kind of do her work and I go off to do mine. And then the intent was to get together for noonday, but we haven't really done that. That's been more separate. And then we were a little bit hit miss on the evening prayers, but we tried to do evening prayers as a family, as a sort of connection moment. So for us, we've really tried to cultivate connection around intentional prayer times, personal silence and solitude. And then when we get together for noise, we try to be very intentional to be like, we're doing this together. So we watch Fringe together, the old sci-fi show. But again, it's like an intentional decision. Like we're entering in this get together. Like we're not going to watch a lot of TV by ourselves.
Right.
We're not going to make a lot of space for personal whiz-bang. Instead, we're going to make a lot of space for personal silence and solitude and corporate prayer and corporate sort of entertainment or leisure.
Great. Well, thank you. And where can folks connect with you? Your website or?
Well, yeah, totally. I think first they can connect with me in the forward of your book, which they all need to buy.
They can reconnect with you.
They can reconnect with me in Reconnect, which honestly, man, I think to just put a final plug in, like we were sort of both working the veins of sobriety at the same time, but you were doing it through digital and I was doing it through alcohol. And I was touching on some of those things, but you were really running with the ball and carrying a lot of water in that space of digital sobriety before digital sobriety was cool, by the way, Cal Newport. But in any event, you were really running those veins. And it has been so helpful to me to think of, in times when I'm drawn to the phone, to think, oh man, I really need to put the phone down and be intentional with my digital sobriety. So first, thank you for that. Really glad you wrote this book.
All right. You're welcome.
I think they can connect with me wherever they want, SethHaines.com, which I've stopped daily writing for a couple months because I'm focusing on some longer form pieces. So right now, the best place to connect with me is probably on my Substack account, which is Seth Haines with an I, Haines, SethHaines.substack.com. And then Twitter and Instagram at Seth Haines, SethHaines. Yeah, those are probably the best ways.
Okay, and if the people connect with you on Instagram, do not post screenshots of your Twitter accounts. Do not.
I mean, you can if you want to.
Right.
But I'll mute you.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a confession. I'll probably draw some heat from that if anybody like that I've muted listens.
Well, if there's anything that we know about social media, it's that you can really like sell more books if you stir the pot. So let's just go there. Right.
That's a good point. So maybe I should say the only reason I mute all the people who share those political rantings on Instagram is because of the principles found in the Book of Waking Up and Reconnect. But you'll have to buy the books to find out what that really means.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Seth. I appreciate you joining us for the interview today.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot. I'm excited to see what happens for you, man.